about exploring the collaborative potential of Web 2.0. And we'll take questions at the end, obviously.
So we have a great
First of all, because if you're expecting me to talk about the sorts of things that were spoken about at the keynote this morning, you're going to be disappointed, so I don't want to build up your hopes. This is a slightly different context. So I am going to talk about Web 2.0, despite the fact that Web 3.0 is very much us and about to explode, but there we go, we're always just that little bit behind. And actually what I'm going to talk about, several years ago, I started, because I took over as senior tutor for e-learning at the Language Centre, to look at how we could embed within our virtual environment. At the time we didn't have a virtual learning environment at all. How we could embed within that the tools that would make language teaching and learning more constructive and more effective. And so take a sort of snapshot, having been a language teacher myself now for 20 more years than I care to remember, and how to actually put in people's hands the tools that they needed to do the things that I knew were going on all the time. I very much take the points that you were raising just now. You know, we think we know what's going on in other people's classrooms, so sometimes what we have to do is to plan for flexibility and plan for people to be able to take things where they would wish to take them. So the context that I work in is a language centre with around 3,000 students. They're non-specialist students, they're engineers, they're mathematicians, historians, whatever, and they're coming to improve or gain their language experience with us. Most of that time, most of their language effort is not spent physically face-to-face in front of a tutor. They have just 2 hours of language study a week, leaving them with a considerable challenge of how to make up the learning gap, if you like, between the content that they've got in front of them, the goal they have to reach, and their exposure to native speakers or language tutors. So it was because of that sort of situation, really, that we needed to look at a virtual learning environment and blended learning provision. And I also started this journey some sort of 5 years ago, looking at why our virtual learning environments contain very little in the way of voice and interaction. And what particularly interested me was the fact that virtual learning environments were out there and sometimes engaging, but the very thing that we use all the time in our face-to-face classrooms, our voice and speaking and responding to people, engaging people, that sort of thing disappeared by the time we got into a virtual environment, making virtual environments a bit dry. Now that's changing rapidly, as we saw this morning. Voice and use of voice over web tools is mainstreaming, certainly through English language teaching, has been for quite some time. Second language teaching, there were sort of pockets of it. But we're actually reaching a phase now and a time where computer-mediated communication, the field of CMC, which is the field that I research in, is actually growing hugely and is raising some interest. Rob O'Dowd has done a lot of work in this area, and you're possibly familiar with the Intent project. If you Google Intent EU, you will find out that Rob and Sarah and a team of people have just recently published a very comprehensive report about the nature of telecollaboration between higher education institutions across Europe. And the Higher Education Academy will be publishing very shortly a UK-based set of case studies showcasing some of the UK HEIs that are doing exactly that as well. So telecollaboration, connecting learners over the internet at a distance. It could be with their classmates, it could be with other people across the other side of the world, is actually sort of moving finally up the rank of buzzwords, and we're starting to think more constructively, I think, about how we can do the sort of things that our students have sort of stumbled across and been doing for a little time now, which is, you know, chatting through Facebook and sending each other messages through Skype and catching up with their friends or their parents at home using technologies such as Skype. In the classroom, that sort of thing hasn't happened extensively. And that's not because we don't want it to happen, I don't think. When I talk to practitioners, most of us recognise that actually it's a really useful thing to enable our students to do. That's just one quote from Clapper, but most people you go to say, yes, oh, isn't it great now that we've got the internet? We can do so much more. It was actually much more tricky and involved scheduling and all sorts of expensive arrangements of hiring buses and things to get people to talk to speakers of other languages. It's so much quicker and so much easier. However, I think that last part of Julie Salmon's work, so this is in generic e-learning terms, points to something which really only gives a glimpse of just how much time and effort has to go in to making computer-mediated communication really work. Julie herself acknowledged that, in fact, it's not, you do require a lot of human time and energy to make these things work when they're not across cultures, when they're not across different languages, and that, in fact, adding culture and language to the mix just makes it harder. So the barriers and the walls continue to rise. We're not alone in thinking about these issues. This is a very recent paper, this is a systems-related technology paper, very recently looking at how people's walled gardens, their virtual learning environments in their institution, are actually very clunky and very difficult to connect together. And just how many barriers, and you can see there a long, long list from the technical perspective only of the barriers that prevent it being straightforward to connect students in Lyon with students in Newcastle. Those examples are chosen at random. Okay, but it's actually far more complex than one might think. And the other part of this context really is Web 2.0. And what a joy it is. The fact that it's very, very simple to go online and Google, okay, I want a technology that will allow me to send a piece of video, or that will make sure that I can get my students to record something. Yes, it's simple, there's thousands and thousands out of it. In fact, if anything, that's part of the problem. It's so simple, there's so many choices, there are so many different ways, and any of those choices won't necessarily work for absolutely everybody. So if I, as a tutor, decide that I'm going to set up as a homework, an exercise, video yourself, recording your conversation about your family, send it in to me, I'm very likely, and this has happened recently in my own context, to receive lots and lots of videos in different formats from different devices, completely increasing the amount of workload that I have, not just marking and looking and listening to them, but actually deciding then how we share them and how I can show them to each other. So there's a whole sort of technical raft of issues that then come along and make life more complicated. Now, I'm fairly pragmatic by nature, so having been given the role of making sure that the learning environment we provided could do wonderful things for our teachers and our users, I decided that there were some things out of all the raft of things that I've got to think about that were part of my circle of concern, but they weren't actually central to what I needed to concentrate on. So I then put those things into these two circles, as you can see, and there were some things that came out as core that I really needed to address about creating a virtual learning environment, and there are some things that I'm certainly concerned about, but I don't have the power or the influence to get involved in, so I can keep an eye on those, but I can focus on eliminating or addressing some of the core principles. So I go through some of these core principles because there's a real reason behind the choice of each of these, really. One of the things that was central was access. This was making sure that my users, whoever they were, could access easily the virtual learning environment and could get the relevant permissions. Now, if those of you who work in an institutional setting where those sort of things are controlled by IT services will have already probably run into those sort of problems. So at the point when we have this great idea of virtual learning, a virtual exchange, we have to then navigate the university's definitions of what makes a student in order to get the right students on the right course in a virtual learning environment. So those sort of things are a big headache and an extra few hours of running around trying to get them addressed. So access needed to be dealt with. And that includes obviously access for a disability perspective as well. Security, meeting certain standards to make sure that anybody can access and everybody can do what they need to do in order to accomplish their goal. The interoperability was also important. So in other words, do I define what a typical user is? What they must use? Must they only use Microsoft products? Must they only access on an Apple device? Not really. I prefer them to be able to access however they want to, from wherever they want to. So I want a suite of tools that are interoperable and that work in a range of environments. I'm not talking sort of about keeping legacy open forever and ever, so somebody on a dial-up or using Internet Explorer 6 or whatever, they may have some problems. However, they probably have problems already accessing Web 2 as it is. So within reason, we want to make sure that it's cross-platform and that everything will work within it. It needs to be flexible. In other words, I don't want one particular pedagogy necessarily to be supported and all others not. Because actually we're all learners, we're all on that continuum, and some of us need the opportunity to experiment and learn from others. So we wanted a system that's flexible, whilst also sort of encouraging the sharing of good practice and making sure we showcase things that really work. I wanted some strategic value from this virtual learning environment, not just solving a short-term problem, but something that actually would help us as a community of teachers and also help our learners as a community of learners to be moving forward together and to be learning from each other. So we needed to facilitate dialogue. Students are not a body of people that we don't talk to. Students and teachers can move roles. So we're students in each other's courses sometimes, and our students are teachers in courses. Our student staff liaison committee has its own course, and they are teachers within that, and they put their information out within that. So a good degree of flexibility and strategic value in terms of encompassing the sorts of activities that are core for language learning, which I think I mentioned definitely need voice and interactivity, ability to interact. Connectivity, again, really it's about helping people to find each other and to connect with each other. It's also about being future-proof and ensuring that the environment can be accessed on mobile devices and is ready for the future, so it doesn't sort of cut off when everything changes, which invariably these things do change at a rate of knots at the moment. And it needs to be really usable, so any tool within the environment needs to be something that I can click on for the first time, having perhaps read a little bit about what it does, evaluated whether it works within my pedagogy, whether I think it's going to fit, and I can see instantly how to use it. So it's got to be obvious. I don't want more than 5 minutes finding out how this works. So a short learning curve. Those were the things that I could control. And this is just a screenshot, obviously, but some of you may have seen upstairs the site itself. The site is called Languages at Warwick. It's actually built on a framework that is Moodle 2. And what it does is incorporate a variety of commercial and open source tools to make sure that the sorts of things that we need to accomplish can be accomplished readily. So I will come back if we have time at the moment to show you some of those things. It was important to have media management within that. Video use, the pace of use of video is increasing hugely. Increasingly, our staff ask us for how-tos through video clips rather than documents that they have to read. They want to quickly see a video. I saw she did that, and then I did that, and then I've got it. I don't have to read about it and then understand it. So video was important, as well as voice. And forming really a community of practice, a group of people all involved. This is our languages at Warwick. This is your course area, but you're also a student on our overall community of practice, which you contribute to, which is a course of its own as well, on its own. So, we had to find partners in order to move this forward, and for this really there's obviously a process of procurement we have to go through, and there's a process of evaluation of tools. Moodle obviously was our core partner. Very quickly we integrated into that in the second year. We're now in our third year. Mahara. And Mahara is an open source tool. It's for reflection. It's to allow students to have their own private creation space. So they click through our Moodle, go into Mahara, they can set up their own blog, they can reflect on their learning. Nobody else can see that, it is private to them. They can set up their groups if they want to socially network between themselves. We have a group of Russian students learning French, for example, and they've just decided that actually they will get together. They're all on different levels of French, but they can get together and they can share experiences and point each other to resources. It also allows you very quickly to create your own web pages. It's a widget-based tool, drag and drop, make web pages, publish them, or allow them to be accessible to others. The other partners are commercial partners, although Kaltura is actually an open source tool. Kaltura is a media specialist streaming solution. And what it allows us to do is to do the sorts of activity I mentioned earlier, where everybody videos on their phone or whatever and they send a video, but they literally click it into Moodle, and Kaltura then takes the video sources, whatever they are, and it does all the crunching for us. So it will look at the file types, it will look at the delivery, and it will make sure that they're served out to whatever device is accessing them in a way that's accessible. So we don't have to look at them and think, oh no, it's an Apple file, we're going to have to convert that. It does all of that automatically. It's got a nice little dashboard at the back, because we also have to make sure if they've supplied or tutors have uploaded commercial video or video that's taken from our satellite system, that's free-to-air satellite, that it's only accessible within the UK, because that's part of our ERA Plus license. So we have to make sure that it's compliant. So Kaltura does all that tricky stuff for us, and it has a really nice little easy interface. It actually plugs into the Moodle, those of you who Moodle users, it plugs into the Moodle media part of the text box. So it will then go straight through into your Kaltura repository, or give you a webcam tool so that you can record directly from the computer on Moodle itself. Blackboard Collaborate was where we ended up because we were Wimble users. Wimble was bought up by Blackboard Collaborate. So this, for us particularly, was about voice management. It takes a long time to think of good activities that you get students engaged in terms of getting them speaking. I'm seeing some nodding, so I know you're aware of this. It takes a long time. They don't naturally think, oh yes, I'll record myself, because I love my tutor so much. They think, how can I avoid doing that? So if you're going to spend that time and you're going to engage them, you want to be able to reuse those resources. You want to be able to take some of those recordings, maybe the setups for the recordings, the first parts of the role plays or whatever, repurpose them. You can do all of that with tools such as Blackboard Collaborate and their voice tools. So that includes a podcaster, a voice board, voice email, voice authoring. So it also adds a little voice applet within, again, your HTML box in Moodle. And finally, the last part of, Blackboard Collaborate also we use for a live classroom. It also gives us a live classroom which you can schedule sessions within Moodle. And finally, Aquella, we're just starting out with Aquella, so this is a repository. Again, this is a way of helping us to manage the resources. Very quickly, once you go down the digital route, I'm sure you're aware, you get a proliferation of resources, but nobody can quite remember what's where. So we're now looking at how we're going to web interface. So I can just type in, I need something on the preterite, and I'll find everything that I can access on the preterite, and I can decide whether it's useful or not. So Aquella is the last part of that puzzle, really. All of these tools, although they all plug into Moodle, they do plug into Blackboard, and in many cases they plug into other VLEs as well. So they're sort of standalone integrations that you can then pull into other sources. So worth having conversations with those people if these are the sorts of things that you're looking to facilitate. So what? So having built the platform, and as I say, we're in the third year now. The first year was a small pilot, 300 students and 12 tutors. The second year was a fuller implementation, 2,000 students and about 20 or so engaged tutors. This year, 50 plus tutors and over 3,000 students. Plus we're working with people in our departments, in the language department. And as we've grown, we have made sure that the projects that we've done together are out in the public domain. So any of these you will see, these are the links obviously, you'll be able to download the slides, you can go straight into those. And the main dissemination channels are the Warwick Language YouTube and Twitter, and then also on SlideShare, Scoopit. So I haven't really got time in the time I've got to go into the detail, but there are lots and lots of different projects that have come out of this, including collaboration with a French university that involves some 700 students, which is looking at formal and informal learning spaces. We have a report coming up very shortly from the HEI around telecollaboration, and a telecollaboration event which you might have seen on the HEA website, which is in February, which I recommend, which is going to be really interesting because we're looking at collaboration and telecollaboration, and this is part of that picture. So those are the sorts of things that have been going on as a result of having the Languages at Warwick portal in place, and those are just my references. If there's anything you'd like to speak to, please stop me at any time. If there's anything that you're interested in, I'm more than happy to send you some links. Okay.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions?
Sorry, Equala, it's a repository?
Yes, Equala is a repository tool.
For language teaching?
No, what it is just a tool.
Okay.
So it can be used for anything. So it manages documents. In our case, we're just looking at it for document management.
Google Docs or Dropbox?
It's more sophisticated than that sort of tool. So it's a commercial tool designed really to be put in place to look at lots and lots of resources that you have, different types of resources, and then to make them searchable, add metadata, manage copyright,
It's free.
and that sort of thing.
It's free.
No, they're commercial. It's commercial, yeah.
It's a plea rather than a question, because within the Intent project that you've mentioned a couple of times, I'm responsible with Melinda Dooley from Barcelona for the development of the e-portfolio for the assessment. And I've seen on your last slide that this is also on your to-do list, or your
we're doing it now. We did it last year as a in fact I presented it at the LLAS conference last year. So we use Mahara for assessment for level 5 French, Chinese and Japanese.
But portfolio-based assessment.
E-portfolio.
So I would like to explore this a bit further with you, because it's also going to be part of this unique collaboration platform. It's one of the outcomes of the Intent.
Well, you'll find me up there as well.
Yes, yeah, the case study, I know.
Yes, we're a case study on there.
Yeah.
But yes, we did use it, and we are continuing to use it for 20% of accreditation for high level language study. It was an interesting journey.
I can imagine, yeah.
But generally, actually, the students found it positive. Most of them, in fact, said, I thought this was going to be a waste of time, but actually, it's been really good for me. Teachers have actually been very positive. Yeah, I mean, it really, obviously, apart from the marking, but, you know, we all have to live with that, don't we, at the end of the course. They found it a useful thing to do. Mahara was a good tool for that. Okay.
Do you provide categories, descriptors for assessment purposes?
Yes, we have an accreditation. I can share that with you. We have a set of accreditation criteria. That did change last year because we had 5 sets of criteria. It's partly focused on pedagogy, partly focused on technology. And in fact, the main difference is that some of those categories have merged, and we've got a simplified 3 bands of criteria to look at. But it is banding rather than discrimination by individual marks.
Yeah, then, okay.
So there were, yeah, there was...
We have created something similar around the TEP, the telecollaborative competent person.
Right,
So
yes.
there might be really some room for cross-fertilization.
Absolutely, I'm sure there
yeah.
would be. That would,
Yeah.
yes, I would be very interested to see
Yeah.
that. Yes, thank you.
Mhm.
Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you very much. Please join